What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses goes toe-to-toe with a late-night host who's lost all sense of boundaries? You won't believe what unfolds when Sandra Bullock sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find herself in the crosshairs of Jimmy Kimmel's most inappropriate line of questioning yet. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is a masterclass in how a seasoned professional handles a host who's completely forgotten his place. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Hollywood royalty meets late-night television's most controversial moment of the year. The stage was set for what should have been a pleasant evening of promotion for Sandra Bullock's latest film. The actress, known for her grace under pressure and quick wit, walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's set with her trademark smile, waving to the enthusiastic studio audience. She looked radiant in a sleek black dress, her hair perfectly styled, every inch the consummate professional who's navigated decades of Hollywood interviews with ease. Jimmy Kimmel, however, seemed different from his usual self. There was an edge to his demeanor, a smugness that veterans of the industry would recognize as trouble brewing. As Sandra settled into the guest chair, adjusting her posture with the confidence of someone who's done this dance 1,000 times before, Kimmel's opening remarks already carried an undertone that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Sandra Bullock, everybody," Kimmel announced with his signature grin, but there was something calculating behind his eyes. "America's sweetheart, though I have to say, some recent tabloid stories might have people questioning that title." The sorry comment landed like a lead balloon in the studio, the audience's applause faltering as Sandra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, Jimmy," Sandra responded, her voice maintaining its warmth despite the obvious provocation, "I think America's smart enough to know the difference between tabloid fiction and reality. But thanks for the warm welcome." Her tone was diplomatic but firm, a clear signal that she wasn't going to be pushed around. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the tension he'd created. "Oh, come on, Sandra. You know I have to ask the tough questions. That's what good interviewers do, right? We dig deep. We get to the truth." His words dripped with false sincerity as he shuffled through his note cards with theatrical flourish. The veteran actress crossed her legs and folded her hands, her posture speaking volumes about her growing irritation. "There's a difference between asking tough questions and perpetuating gossip, Jimmy. I thought you knew that distinction by now." The subtle dig wasn't lost on anyone in the studio, least of all Kimmel, whose jaw tightened slightly. "Ooh, she's got claws tonight, folks," Kimmel said, turning to the audience with exaggerated surprise. The studio audience remained notably quiet, sensing the brewing storm between their host and his guest. "But seriously, Sandra, when you're in the public eye like you are, don't you think people deserve to know the real you? Not just the polished Hollywood version?" Sandra's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "The real me is sitting right here, Jimmy. I've been nothing but authentic throughout my entire career. What you're referring to as polished is actually called professionalism. You might want to look into it." The burn was delivered with such surgical precision that even Kimmel's house band exchanged glances. The host's face reddened slightly, his composure beginning to crack under Sandra's composed but cutting response. This wasn't going according to his script, and his frustration was becoming visible to everyone in the studio. "Professionalism," Kimmel repeated, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "Is that what we're calling it when you shut down entire press junkets because you don't like the questions? When you have your publicist screen every single interview to make sure no one asks anything you consider inappropriate?" His air quotes were theatrical and condescending. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Sandra's expression shifted, from diplomatic annoyance to genuine anger. "Jimmy, I think you're confusing me with someone else. I've never shut down a press junket in my life. I show up, I answer questions honestly, and I treat people with respect. Apparently that's more than I can expect in return." Really? Kimmel pressed, clearly emboldened by what he perceived as gaining the upper hand. Because I have it on good authority that you've been pretty selective about your appearances lately, avoiding certain topics, certain questions about your personal life, makes people wonder what you're hiding. The studio had gone completely quiet now, the audience sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Sandra Bullock, one of Hollywood's most respected figures, was being ambushed on live television by a host who seemed determined to push every boundary of professional conduct. Sandra's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. Jimmy, I'm going to give you one opportunity to remember that you invited me here as your guest, not as a defendant in some courtroom drama you've invented in your head. I came here to talk about my work, not to be subjected to whatever this is. But Kimmel was too far down his chosen path to turn back now, his ego apparently writing checks his professionalism couldn't cash. The confrontation was about to escalate beyond anything either of them could have anticipated, and the tension in the studio was becoming unbearable as America watched one of their most beloved actresses face down a host who had clearly lost all sense of boundaries. You want to know what I think, Sandra? Kimmel continued, his voice taking on an almost predatory tone as he leaned forward in his chair. I think you've gotten so comfortable in your little bubble of Hollywood privilege that you've forgotten what real journalism looks like, what real questions sound like. Sandra's composure finally began to show visible cracks. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the arms of her chair, and her voice dropped to a dangerously low register. Journalism? Is that what you're calling this ambush? Because I've worked with actual journalists, Jimmy, and they don't hide behind cheap shots and manufactured controversy. The accusation hit Kimmel like a slap, and his mask of professional civility completely slipped away. Manufactured? Lady, you're the one who built an entire career on playing America's sweetheart, while your real life tells a completely different story. Don't lecture me about manufacturing anything. My real life? Sandra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the studio floor with a sound that echoed through the dead-silent studio. You want to talk about real life? Let's talk about yours, Jimmy. Let's talk about a host who's so desperate for ratings that he'll attack his own guests on live television. The studio audience was frozen, some covering their mouths in shock, others pulling out their phones to capture what was clearly becoming television history. Kimmel's production crew could be seen frantically gesturing from the wings, but their host was too far gone to notice or care. Attack? Kimmel scoffed, rising from his own chair to match Sandra's standing position. I'm asking legitimate questions that your fans deserve answers to. You can't just waltz in here expecting softball questions and promotional fluff pieces. This isn't some morning show puff interview. Legitimate questions? Sandra's voice rose. For the first time, her famous composure finally giving way to righteous anger. You want legitimate? Here's legitimate. What kind of host ambushes a guest who came here in good faith? What kind of professional uses his platform to spread tabloid garbage as if it were fact? The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, with both combatants now standing and facing each other across the interview setup like fighters in a ring. Kimmel's face was flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and fury, while Sandra radiated the kind of controlled rage that only comes from years of dealing with Hollywood's worst behavior. Good faith? Kimmel's laugh was bitter and mocking. You came here to sell a movie, Sandra. Let's not pretend this was some charitable appearance. You need this show more than this show needs you, and we both know it. The insult was so blatantly disrespectful that even Kimmel's own band members were shaking their heads in disbelief. Sandra Bullock, with her decades-long career and multiple awards, being told she needed his show was perhaps the most tone-deaf thing anyone had heard on late-night television. Sandra's response was measured but devastating. Jimmy, I've been doing this job since before you knew what a talk show was. I've sat across from real professionals, real interviewers who understand that their job is to entertain their audience, not to bully their guests. You're confusing shock value with talent. Talent? Kimmel's voice cracked slightly, his ego taking hit after hit as Sandra systematically dismantled his credibility. You want to talk about talent? How about we talk about buying your way into roles? How about we discuss the real story behind your so-called natural performances? The accusation was so outrageous, so completely unfounded, that it seemed to suck all the air out of the studio. Sandra's eyes widened with genuine disbelief before narrowing into something approaching contempt. Are you seriously suggesting that I've bought my way through a 30-year career? Are you actually that desperate? I'm suggesting, Kimmel said, his voice taking on the tone of someone who believes they're delivering a killing blow, that maybe it's time someone asked the hard questions about how Hollywood really works, about who gets the roles and why, about what really goes on behind those closed doors. The implication was clear, disgusting, and completely inappropriate for any professional setting, let alone a nationally televised talk show. Sandra's face went pale with shock and fury, and several audience members could be heard gasping audibly. You need to stop talking right now, Sandra said, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever point you think you're making, you need to stop before you say something that destroys what's left of your career. But Kimmel was beyond reason now, drunk on his own perceived power, and completely oblivious to the hole he was digging for himself. My career? Sandra, I think you're confused about who has the power in this situation. This is my show, my studio, my audience. You're just another guest trying to stay relevant. The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra Bullock stood motionless for a long moment, her chest rising and falling as she processed the complete breakdown of professional courtesy she was witnessing. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute finality. Jimmy, she said, her words cutting through the studio silence like a blade. In 30 years of this business, I have never encountered someone so fundamentally confused about what their job actually is. Your job is to entertain people, to make them laugh, to give them a break from their day. Instead, you've chosen to use your platform to spread lies, to attack people who trusted you enough to sit in that chair, and to embarrass yourself on national television. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Sandra held up her hand with such authority that he actually stopped mid-breath. The gesture was so commanding, so final, that even his own crew seemed to lean forward in anticipation of what would come next. I'm not finished, Sandra continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. You accused me of buying roles, of being fake, of hiding behind some manufactured image. Let me tell you what's real, Jimmy. What's real is that I've worked every single day for 3 decades to earn the respect of my peers, my audiences, and the industry. What's real is that I've treated every person I've worked with, from A-list actors to craft services, with dignity and respect. Her voice rose slightly, passion breaking through her controlled demeanor. What's real is that you just threw away whatever credibility you had left as a host because your ego couldn't handle having an actual conversation with someone who won't play your games. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of Sandra's methodical destruction of Kimmel's professional reputation. You want to know what else is real? Sandra stepped closer to Kimmel's desk, her presence commanding the entire studio. The fact that you're so threatened by successful women that you have to resort to personal attacks and unfounded accusations. The fact that you've forgotten that being a host means serving your audience, not feeding your own insecurities. Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as a weak stammer. Sandra, look, maybe we got a little heated here, but this is television. This is entertainment. People want to see real moments, real conflict. Real conflict? Sandra's laugh was sharp and humorless. Jimmy, there's nothing real about what you just did. You manufactured a controversy where none existed. You attacked someone who came here as your guest. You violated every principle of basic human decency, let alone professional conduct. She turned to address the studio audience directly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what you just witnessed. This is what happens when someone in a position of power forgets that their role is to lift people up, not tear them down. The audience began to murmur among themselves, many nodding in agreement with Sandra's words. The energy in the room had completely shifted, with the crowd's sympathy clearly lying with the actress who had maintained her dignity throughout the entire ordeal. Turning back to Kimmel, Sandra delivered what would become her most quoted line of the evening. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about art, about storytelling, about the craft that I love. Instead, I got a masterclass in how not to conduct yourself as a professional. I hope your audience got something valuable out of this experience, because I certainly did." Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Sandra, come on, sit back down. Let's reset this. We can start over, talk about the movie, get back on track." Sandra was already reaching for her purse, her movements deliberate and final. "Jimmy, some things can't be reset. Some lines, once crossed, don't get uncrossed. You made your choice tonight about what kind of host you want to be, and I'm making mine about what kind of guest I'm willing to be." The finality in her voice was unmistakable. She slung her purse over her shoulder and looked directly into the camera, addressing the viewing audience at home. "To everyone watching at home, thank you for your support over all these years. You deserve better entertainment than what you witnessed here tonight." As Sandra began walking toward the exit, Kimmel called out in what sounded like genuine panic. "Sandra, wait, don't do this. We can work this out." She paused at the edge of the stage, turning back one final time. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was disappointed, which somehow felt even more devastating. "Jimmy, the only thing we can work out is how you're going to explain to your producers why you just sabotaged your own show." "This is live television," Kimmel protested, his voice cracking with desperation. "You can't just walk out. People are watching." Sandra's final response was delivered with the kind of quiet dignity that had made her a beloved figure for decades. "That's exactly why I can walk out, Jimmy. Because people are watching. They're watching how you treat your guests, how you handle conflict, how you represent their values. And they're watching me refuse to be complicit in whatever this was supposed to be." With that, Sandra Bullock walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, her heels clicking against the floor in the dead silence of the studio. The camera followed her exit, capturing the moment she disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Kimmel standing alone at his desk, looking completely lost and deflated. The host stood there for several long seconds, the reality of what had just occurred seemingly hitting him all at once. His studio audience sat in uncomfortable silence, many of them looking embarrassed to have witnessed such an unprofessional display. The band members exchanged worried glances, and production assistants could be seen frantically moving around in the background. Finally, Kimmel turned to face his audience, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Well," he said weakly, "I guess we'll be right back after these messages." His voice lacked any of its usual confidence, and the customary smile was nowhere to be found. As the show cut to commercial, America had witnessed something unprecedented. A beloved actress standing up to a host who had completely lost his way, defending not just herself, but the principles of respect and professionalism that should govern all human interactions. Sandra Bullock had walked off that stage with her integrity intact, leaving behind a host who would have to face the consequences of his actions, and a television moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come.